Hi. Before we start reading today, I'm going to show you a slideshow of some nature shots that I took in southern Kentucky yesterday. Hi. Welcome to Chapter 15 of A Day of Rest by Edna Creekmore Carmen. This is the picture that goes along with this chapter. Dad has found Susan, and let's see what happens next. Chapter 15. As the sobs slowly died away, Douglas took a handkerchief from his pants pocket and wiped Susan's eyes and face gently. Blow. Doug held the handkerchief to Susan's nose. With a resounding honk, Susan cleared her head. Now, Douglas continued firmly, after setting Susan on the ground and kneeling before her. Tell me, what were you doing down at the mine? Susan stared at her dad. Forgetting Bert and Jim for the moment, she wondered how her dad could know where she had been. She did not realize that he could have traced her trip accurately by the smell of tea berry on her lips, heart leaf on her fingers, and the faint smell of pennyroyal. But he needed only the black, gummy mud splashed on Susan's dress to tell him Susan had been at the mine. Why were you at the mine, Susan? Douglas repeated his question. Bert took me, Susan replied, and fearing an immediate scolding, broke out crying again. Now stop that crying. It will do no good, Douglas commanded severely before asking. Where's Bert? Why didn't he come home with you? They took him, Susan answered tearfully. They took Jim also. Jim? Jim was with us. I see, Douglas frowned. He did see why they were at the mine. Bert was showing off for the older boy. But why did Bert and Jim not bring Susan home first and then go to the mine? Did you say someone took them? Yes, the men took them. Susan, what men are you talking about? There are no men working at the mine. The men came in a wagon, Susan whimpered. Douglas looked up through the trees at a spot on the side of the mountain. He must keep calm. Keep the frustration from showing. What Susan was trying to tell him was important, But how was he to get her to tell the story so he could understand? He slid around beside her and put his arm across her shoulders, but made no effort to stop the flow of tears. Looking thoughtfully down the hills, Douglas tried to figure out Susan's story. Jim Weaver had come back with Bert from the school. They had come through the cornfield where the cows were feeding, and then decided to go to the mine. But where did the men come in? What were the men doing at the mine? What happened to Bert and Jim that they did not bring Susan home? Bert would not have gone willingly with anyone and left Susan down there by herself. Douglas frowned as he remembered that there was one young man who might have been at the mine. He had given Rob Barton permission to cut the dead timber in that area and sell it for firewood. Walter was trying to save all the money he could to pay off that mortgage he had contracted when he bought that land that adjoined the home place. Rob had been anxious to help with the family finances. He had been at the mine for several weeks cutting down those old trees. He certainly had the right to be down there, but Rob wasn't the kind to hurt Bert or anyone. No, Douglas shook his head. He couldn't be that mistaken in the young man. Rob wouldn't hurt Bert. Now, Susan, Douglas spoke soothingly, I know that Bert brought you back from the singing convention through the cornfield. Jim was with you, so Bert decided to show him the mine. Now tell me what happened at the mine. Susan began her story by telling about the rats at the mine and how she wouldn't go in and how Bert and Jim went in. She told how she heard the mules and the wagon and how Bert came out of the mine and made her hide in the bushes. As Susan told about the men going into the mine with jugs, Douglas nodded. He knew pretty well just what those men were doing, and it wasn't stealing coal. Bert followed the two men in the mine to see what they were doing. But Daddy, Susan broke into her running narrative, Daddy, one of those men came back to the wagon to get more jugs, and when he went back into the mine, he saw Bert hiding behind one of the logs. You know those logs that stand on their ends on the side of the tunnel? Yes, I know. Douglas nodded to show that he understood about the supports, so Susan went on with her story about how the men had caught Bert. They caught Bert, and then Jim came running out of the mine and tried to make the men let Bert go, and they caught him. The men tied their hands and their feet together and then tied them to the wagon. I tried to untie Bert, but I couldn't. I really couldn't, Daddy. Susan looked up at her dad, her tear-reddened eyes pleading for understanding. It was Bert that told me to come back and tell you about the men. I wanted to go with him, but Bert said I couldn't. Bert was right. Douglas Bert was right. Douglas spoke soothingly as he pulled his watch out of his pocket. It was best that you come back and tell me about the men, he added as he tried to figure out what he should do. It was almost 6. He had an idea who the men were that took Bert and Jim, but he should be sure before he did anything. It would waste time in the log run to go after the wrong men. One of the men said they should let Bert and Jim go. He said it would make you mad. Susan broke into Douglas's thoughts. So they knew me? Yes, one did. He said Bert looked just like you and that he was your boy, not Uncle Charles. Susan turned to face her dad. She saw the strong, manly features of her dad and compared them in her mind to the soft, boyish features of Bert, and saw no likeness. She discounted the red hair, black eyebrows, and hazel eyes as being unimportant. They said Jim didn't look like you, though. Why should they say that? Because Bert said that Jim was his brother. That was smart of Bert, Douglas said to Susan's surprise. But even thinking that both boys were mine, they took them anyway? One said he wasn't going to have anything to do with kidnapping Jim and Bert. He said he wasn't going to have anything to do with it and just walked off, leaving Bert and Jim and the jugs in the wagon and the wood. And the wood? Where were you? I hid behind the bushes until the wagon got out of sight. I was so scared. Before Susan could start crying again, Douglas stood up. Of course you were scared, Susan. You are a very big, brave, smart girl to come all that way by yourself. Bert will be very proud of his sister.